So last week we finished up talking about Abraham, and we talked about the birth of his son Isaac, and then how God asked him to sacrifice Isaac on Mount Moriah, and that whole story. This week we're going to transition a little bit into the life of his son Isaac, and then eventually his son Jacob, and kind of look at these three pillars of the Old Testament: Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So in Genesis 24, Abraham is getting older, Isaac's getting older, he's still not married, and he doesn't want Isaac to marry one of the Canaanite women where he lives. And so he tells his servant that he wants him to go back to the land where he's originally from and his relatives are from to find a wife for his son Isaac. And so his servant is very faithful, and he promises to do that. And that's where the story picks up here in Genesis chapter 24, verse 10. Then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master. And he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. Now Nahor was Abraham's brother. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, the time when women go out to draw water. So if you can imagine, the city, we don't really know how far off is from this well, but each evening the women would come out, they would draw water from this well in these, large containers, maybe 3 to 5 gallons. They probably had, some kind of shoulder harness way of carrying them, or if they carried them on their shoulders or whatever, and they would bring them back to the city. The servant is out by the well with all of his camels, and he's waiting for these ladies to come out so he can kind of get some information about the people of the city and the relatives of Abraham and everything like that. So the servant's out there, he's by the well, and of course he's got this huge responsibility from Abraham that he charged him with, made him promise and swear, that he would bring back a wife for Isaac. And so he wants to make sure he gets this right. And so he kind of puts this little test out there so that he will know that he's doing the right thing with God. And so he prays and he says, God, I pray that the woman that I say, will you give me a drink of water? And she responds by saying, not only will I give you a drink of water, but I will water your camels also. He said, that will be the one. That's how I'll know the one that you've picked for my master Abraham and Isaac. So in verse 15, while he's still praying, verse 15 says, before he had finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born to Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known. She went down to the spring and filled her jar and came up. Then the servant ran to meet her and said, please, give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking. So exactly what the servant prayed is exactly what happened. Now you got to just pause for a second here, okay? Because this is no small task. Remember, he had 10 camels, all right? And so do a little research on this. You'll find out that a camel in a span of about 13 to 15 minutes can drink 30 gallons of water. So he had 10 camels, that's 300 gallons of water, because she specifically says, I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking. So they're just coming from this long journey. They're just arriving. These camels are thirsty. And she says, I'll give you something to drink and I'll give water for your camels also. So we're looking at, of course, these are just estimates, but we're looking at potentially about 300 gallons of water that this woman is about to provide for these camels. I'm assuming that whatever jar she was carrying was probably 3 to 5 gallon jar. We'll say it was 5 gallons. And so the well is not too far from where the trough is, but it was a little distance, because in just a moment it says that she ran to the well and then brought the water back. So she's I don't know if she's running and dumping, but however this is going, she's going back and forth, filling this trough with water for 300 gallons. So this was no small thing. Besides the fact she doesn't know this man, he's a complete stranger. And yet she goes out of her way to do this. So verse 20, So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. You know what's the most amazing thing to me about this story is that she was actually watering her own camels, and she didn't even know that. She didn't realize that this man had brought these camels as a gift for the person that would be Isaac's future wife. And here she is watering this other person's camels. They're actually her camels. She doesn't even know it. And I mean, how many times does God do something just like that in your life, in our lives, where he has you serve and do something and it's with no ulterior motive, and because of it you actually qualify and find out that, wow, you didn't even realize that you were qualifying yourself for this much bigger blessing. Maybe the very thing that you were serving gets handed to you and passed to you. I've seen this type of thing happen in ministry so many times, where someone is serving, helping, doing, putting forth effort and help, and then only for that very thing to be passed to them. And they weren't doing it for that reason, but God did it. You know, I think it just says a lot about Rebecca's character, because you can make no mistake, this was not a one-time fluke thing for her. You can bet this was her character. This was who she was as a person, which would obviously be one of the reasons why God chose her and picked her. But her willingness to serve and to be a blessing to this stranger is obviously was a character trait. This reminds me of something Jesus said in Luke chapter 16, verse 10. He says, "One who is faithful in a very little is also faithful in much, and one who is dishonest in a very little is also dishonest in much. If then you have not been faithful in the unrighteous wealth, who will trust you to the true riches? And if you have not been faithful in that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own?" And you could see here that Rebecca was being faithful with what was someone else's, and it ended up becoming her own, and she didn't even know that that was going to happen. So when the camels had finished drinking, the man starts to pull out all these other gifts. He pulls out some gold bracelets and other things, and all these things were for the future, whoever the future wife of Isaac would be. And he begins to explain who he is, and then he finds out that this is one of the family members of Nahor, who is Abraham's brother. And so again, he gives praise to God, and he says, "Praise, you've led me right to, the exact family member of Nahor, the person that we wanted to, that Abraham wanted his son's wife to come from." And so he goes and meets the family, and they pray, and they're all rejoicing, and they're happy for Rebecca to go back and meet Isaac, and later on in the story, of course, she goes back with the servant, and her and Isaac get married, and they live happily ever after, so to speak, as Bible stories go. But I want to focus on a few key points that we can draw from this passage. And first of all, I want to speak to those who are single, because if you'll notice, this is something that those who are single often stress out over a lot, is who am I going to marry? Who does God have for me? How am I going to meet this person? How is it all going to be orchestrated? And what if I'm supposed to be living in this city, but they're in this city? And what if I'm supposed to be here and they're there? And all these swirling thoughts of just what if? And instead of just trusting and believing God to bring that person that he has for you. But if you look at this passage, as far as we know, Rebecca had no prospects up until the very day that this happened. This wasn't like a gradual thing. It was instant. It was sudden. She was going out like every other day to get water for her family, and it was in the middle of a very menial task, something that she did every day, that she was just being faithful at, going about her life, having her character, serving God. And it was in the middle of just another regular day of faithfulness that suddenly God brought her the person that she could have never dreamed of. Really, it was exceedingly above anything she could have thought or imagined. And what I want those who are single to understand is this is not something that you need to be stressing out over. It's nothing you can control. It's nothing you can make happen. And the more you try to stress out over it and make it happen or worry about it, really the more harm that you're doing. The best thing that you can do is be faithful right in the middle of the will of God. Just be faithful right in the middle of the will of God. Be faithful to develop yourself and your character, your faithfulness. Be faithful to do the small things. And right in the middle of that, God can bring you whoever He has for you, and will do that. This doesn't just apply to single people, it applies to everyone. Because God, just as in this instance, He's bringing Isaac a wife and Rebekah a husband. But whatever you're going through, this is often how we find ourselves in the will of God, is by just doing the basic things that we know are right and being faithful at them. Prayer, reading the Word, going to church, serving, being a good husband or wife or father or mother, just being faithful, you know. And so many times it's right just doing those normal, regular things that God's blessing will find you right where you're at. It reminds me of a scripture in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 26. It says, "Many seek the face of a ruler, but it is from the Lord that a man gets justice." So what I believe this is referring to is that when a person finds themselves in trouble or in need, it says they seek the face of a ruler, somebody in high places, somebody that has influence, that can help them get out of their situation. What this passage says is, many seek the face of a ruler, but it is from the Lord that a man gets justice. And so while everybody else is running around trying to make things happen by the arm of the flesh, you know, find a person of influence or to make something happen, it would be better just to seek God and trust God and say, you know what, God, I'm going to trust you to work on my behalf. And that's exactly what happened to Rebekah. It's exactly what happened to Isaac. Rebekah didn't know that this day was coming. She was just going about her regular day. And this situation found her because justice comes from God. Blessing comes from God. She wasn't fighting for this. God did it. And I think that's a lesson for us. Again, I see this happen in ministry all the time. I remember listening to one pastor as he talked about how he went to serve at another church, and the Lord knew that the Lord had called him there, and the only thing the Lord had spoke to him was to go there and help. And he said, I don't really know how to help. I don't really know what they need help with. And so he remembered he was in their Bible school, and they would say, well, we need help, setting up chairs. And it said it kind of went off like a light bulb in him, like, well, he said they need help. I guess I'm here to help, so whatever they need help with. So he'd help set up the chairs. And next say, well, we need help volunteers for this event. He said, well, they need help. So he would go and help. And he said that was his call from God, was just to help. And that's what he did. Anytime they needed help, he would volunteer to do it. Didn't matter whether he was gifted at it, talented at it, any of that, just they need help, and so he would go. And because he would do that, he ended up being at a lot of stuff, and eventually he got recognized as being faithful and helpful, and he just kind of slowly started moving up the ranks until he eventually ended up being one of the top pastors in that ministry, and it was a large ministry. And that always stuck out to me, because I feel like that's how God works in everyone's life, is He'll give you something small to do, and you just do it faithfully. And it's right in the middle of doing those small things that God's big blessing will find you right where you're at.